offenses prescribed by the election laws of the state.
Mr. Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, House Bill 5138 restores the authority of the Office of Attorney General to prosecute election-related crimes. There continues to be concern over voter fraud across the nation as well in the state of Texas. And late last year, it was discovered that thousands of non-citizens were found to have illegally registered to vote in Texas. Additionally, after the December 2021 State v. Stevens opinion, taking the power to prosecute election crime away from the Office of the Attorney General, the number of election cases handled by the AG dropped by over 250. District attorneys have faced scrutiny and accusations of not prosecuting crimes, including election fraud, leading to a debate about prosecutorial discretion and the role of election prosecutors. So in the State versus Stevens, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals reasoned that the Office of Attorney General and local prosecutors cannot both independently prosecute criminal matters without violating the separation of powers. HB 5138 allows the Office of Attorney General to prosecute after giving local prosecutors 6 months to bring their own case, and by using the term shall versus may to address the issues of concurrent jurisdiction in the opinion. By creating a protected time when only local prosecutors may bring charges, HB 5138 addresses the court's requirement that there be a separation of powers. These provisions satisfy the concerns brought to light by the Stevens opinion.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Turner, for what purpose?
The gentleman yield for some questions.
The gentleman yield for questions.
Sure.
The gentleman yields.
Thank you, Representative Shaheen. I have several questions about your bill, but first you said something as you were starting your layout about a certain number of cases. I didn't quite catch that. Could you repeat that again?
Late last year, it was reported that there were thousands of individuals who are non-citizens that were registered to vote. Actually, in addition to that, they also found 6,000 additional individuals who were convicted of felons that were registered to vote.
So, what is the source of that report, Mr. Shaheen?
There's been several articles. One of them was the New York Post.
So, I think I recall what you're referring to, and that was, I believe that was a press release that was initially put out by the governor's office. Was that right?
I can only refer you to the New York Post article that I read. It was covered in a couple of different news sources.
It was covered. I think the source of that information was the governor's office, and then subsequently it was reported that a lot of that information was erroneous, and the numbers were dramatically overstated.
I don't think that's accurate at all.
Well, I think
The Attorney General by himself saw a reduction of 250 cases when the prosecutorial power was taken away.
You're right. You're right about that, Mr. Shaheen. Since the Court of Criminal Appeals ruled that the Attorney General does not have the power to prosecute these cases under the state constitution, you're correct. They're no longer prosecuting those cases.
That's right. So there were 250 cases that probably should have been prosecuted that weren't. So the fact that there's another article saying that there's 6,500 non-U.S. citizens
let's get into why that is, Mr. Shaheen.
Members, please refrain from talking over one another during the debate. Also, please take your conversations outside the rails.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All right, Mr. Shaheen. So, in our state's constitution, the Office of Attorney General belongs to the executive branch of government. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And locally elected county attorneys and district attorneys are within the judicial branch of government under the Texas Constitution. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And so, are you familiar with the separation of powers provision in the Texas Constitution?
Do I what?
Are you familiar with the separation of powers provision in the Texas Constitution?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay. So would you agree that the separation of powers provision of our Constitution prohibits one department of government from interfering with or assuming the duties of another department of government unless expressly authorized by the Constitution itself? Would you agree with that?
That's one scenario. There's also a scenario that there could be different time periods where different parties can prosecute.
Is that in the Constitution somewhere that there's different time periods for different parties to prosecute?
No, those words aren't in the Constitution, no.
Okay, I
But
didn't.
it does say in the Constitution under Article 5 where we designate the AG's power, and in Article 4 we designate the district attorneys, that the legislature has the authority to give them additional powers.
So you agree the constitutional duties assigned to locally elected district attorneys and county attorneys, and that's in the Constitution, Article 5, Section 21, that their duties are to represent the state in all cases in the district and inferior courts in their respective counties, correct? That's what that says.
That's accurate, yep.
Okay. All right. Does the Texas Constitution expressly permit the office of the Attorney General to undertake the constitutional duties assigned to locally elected district and county attorneys to represent the state in all cases in district and in inferior courts?
Say that again. I'm one following.
Does the Constitution
Yeah.
expressly permit the Attorney General to undertake those constitutional duties assigned to locally elected district attorneys and county attorneys to represent the state?
So specifically, what it says is Article 4, Section 22 of the Texas Constitution outlines the duties of the Attorney General and states perform such other duties as may be required by law. So this body here can give the Attorney General other duties, which we have.
I completely agree. I think this legislature has given the Attorney General a lot of other duties, some of which I agree with, some of which I don't. But it doesn't say that the legislature can assign other duties to the Attorney General if they conflict with the Constitution. It doesn't say that, does it?
I'm not familiar with where the Constitution makes a comment about conflicting with itself.
Well, it doesn't, but the Constitution says what the Attorney General's powers are. It says what the district attorney's powers are, and that gets to the heart of the Stevens case, does it not? I mean, you referenced the Stevens case, so let's...
But the Constitution also does say that the Attorney General is to perform such other duties as may be required by law. This body here can prescribe those other duties, and like I said before, we have done those in the past.
Well, I hear that you said that, but that's not what the Stevens decision says. The Stevens decision found that the Constitution does not allow the Attorney General to prosecute criminal election cases unless specifically invited in by the county attorney or the district attorney.
Let's be a little
That's
bit,
what they found.
So let's be a little bit more specific. Well, let's be a little bit more specific about the Stevens case. So in page 16, what it says is you couldn't have concurrent jurisdiction. So you couldn't have a situation at the same period of time where you had the district attorney that was prosecuting and then the AG prosecuting. On page 19, it also pointed out that the statute that originally gave the Attorney General the power said that he may prosecute. So what this legislation does is it addresses the concerns that were brought up by the Stevens case. So that's why you have the provision that says the Attorney General cannot prosecute an election crime until 6 months has elapsed, and then also the Attorney General can't prosecute an election crime unless they've been provided a report of the proposed or the alleged offense.
Mr. Shaheen.
So which addresses the issues in the Stevens case.
Well, let me just quote to you from the Stevens case.
Okay.
Stevens, presents the following question. May the Texas legislature delegate to the Attorney General, a member of the executive department, the prosecution of election law violations in district and inferior courts? No. No, period. Because Texas Election Code Section 273.021 delegates to the Attorney General a power more properly assigned to the judicial department, we conclude that that statute is unconstitutional. So the proposed statute that you've laid before the House right now is going to run into the same fatal flaw that Election Code 273.021 did in the Stevens case, because you're delegating a power to the Attorney General that is, quote, more properly assigned to the judicial department. And the court was very, very clear about this. They didn't address concurrent jurisdictions and lag times
Yes,
and
it
what
did.
period. So, but But
page
in
16
this
specifically
excerpt I'm
called out-
reading to you is
page
very,
six-
very clear.
Page 16 of the opinion specifically called out concurrent jurisdictions. And I will tell you, in defending the Attorney General's power, they reference the Brady case. And when you say that the Stevens case overturned the statute, that was a statute that was passed several sessions ago. This piece of legislation addresses the flaws that are pointed out in the opinion by, like I said, there's a 6-month period where the local DA can prosecute, and not until after that time period can the Attorney General step in. And then there's the case where the Attorney General has to receive a report that alleged election crime has been, may have been conducted.
So you referenced page 16 of the opinion, and I agree it addresses concurrent jurisdiction. I think
Yep.
I have a slightly different interpretation of that than you do. But if you turn the page to page 17.
Well, let me read it to you. On page 16, the State versus Stevens opinion calls out an issue with the law that was passed by the legislature, stating, a plain reading of the statute reveals that the legislature drafted the statute using the words may prosecute, and may appears. Under the ordinary meaning of the words, may is permissive, while shall is mandatory, creating a concurrent jurisdiction. So what this House bill does is it doesn't use the term may, it uses the term shall, addressing the item which I think you were about to point out on page 16.
Right. Well, I was going to go to page 17. I agree with you. That's what it says. But so what you just read is part of 2A of the opinion. 2B, do you see 2B in front of you on page 17?
Yes.
What is 2B? What's the header of 2B?
It's an item we mentioned before. It says the Texas Constitution requires county and district attorney consent.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly. Which is what we have today, right? If the county and district attorney, county or district attorney, says we would like the assistance of the Office of the Attorney General to look into a case, they can do that. And then the Attorney General can do that if requested. I mean, that's the case today, is it not?
Well, if you continue to read the opinion, it gets to the point where it says any attempt to overlap the Attorney General's constitutional duties with county and district's constitutional duties is unconstitutional. So that's why you have the bifurcation of the time so that you don't have an overlap. So if you take where you are in page 17 and read the conclusion of that section, what you'll find is where this House bill also addressed this issue with overlapping jurisdiction. So again, having the 6-month time period where the district attorney can choose whether to prosecute or not, and if they don't, then the Attorney General can step in. That addresses the item that you just brought up on page 17.
Well, I don't think it does, because I think the fundamental underpinning of the Stevens case that the court ruled is that the powers to prosecute lie solely in the state of Texas with county attorneys and district attorneys. The Attorney General is in the executive branch of government. Those offices are housed in the judicial branch of government, which is where the framers of our Constitution intended matters of criminal law to be housed. And so again, I think that we have a very clear ruling from the Court of Criminal Appeals just a couple of years ago, and your bill, I fear, is going to be a clear violation of that ruling and ultimately found to be unconstitutional.
Well, I can ease your fears because we had the Stevens opinion in mind when we wrote this bill, so I want to ease your concerns.
Well, I have no doubt you took the opinion into account, but I still think it has the same fatal flaw, because fundamentally the Attorney General simply does not have the power in the state of Texas to prosecute criminal cases without the consent and the invitation of the local prosecutor.
That's inaccurate. If you go to the Attorney General's website, There's actually a site that says if
Well, I'm
you
looking at the
ex-
Constitution, not the Attorney General's
Well, it's
website.
based on his constitutional authority. So there's a website that says if there's a cyber attack, and the state statute does say that the Attorney General can prosecute cybercrime. So if you go to a website and there is a data breach that impacts 250 Texans or more, you can go directly to the Attorney General.
So let me ask you just a couple more questions.
Sure.
So let's say this bill passes and OAG assumes jurisdiction over prosecution of an election offense, and then OAG later decides that they'd rather not prosecute the case for whatever reason.
Yep.
And then they want the local prosecutor to prosecute this case instead. Can the OAG force the local prosecutor to take the case back?
I don't know if he's in a position to force, but clearly the two entities can talk and determine what's the best course of action. That happens quite often in law enforcement.
But wouldn't the local prosecutor have already forfeited their jurisdiction?
Yeah, but the Attorney General and local prosecutors work all the time. I mean, think about an instance where we have multiple counties where a crime's been committed, right? There's multiple scenarios in law enforcement where you have different jurisdictions that work together, and clearly the Attorney General can talk to a district attorney to take a course of action and determine what's the best way to serve the community.
And I agree with you that does happen all the time, and that's a good thing when you have different agencies and different levels of government coordinating with one another.
Yeah.
But when there's a conflict, and sometimes there is a conflict, and perhaps just an honest disagreement about whether there's a case, whether it arises to the level of prosecution, can the OAG in a situation like that force a local prosecutor to take it back up?
The way the statute is written, after 6 months, the case is the Attorney General's.
So cannot send it back to the local prosecutor then?
I don't think the Attorney General has the power to force a district attorney to do something. I don't think that's in the Constitution.
Okay. Okay. So the Attorney General, your belief is, could recommend perhaps that a prosecutor take it back up, but does not have the power to compel a local prosecutor.
I don't believe that the Attorney General has the power to force a district attorney to take action.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Sheen.
Sure.
Mr. Busey, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for a few
Does
questions?
the gentleman yield for questions?
Sure.
Gentleman yields for questions.
Thank you, Representative. In your layout, you referenced, would you give us the stat again? For the predicate for why we needed this bill, you laid out 6,500 or something referenced by the governor.
Well, there's three different areas where I believe this bill is required. First of all, there's district attorneys that face scrutiny of accusations of
Sure,
not
I would
persecuting
like to-
crimes.
The
Well, if
reason
I
I
could,
jumped up on,
but
no,
you're
I
asking me why I'm
Well,
laying this
no,
bill
I was
out, right?
asking the number you laid out and what it was. That's specific in your opening sentence, I believe.
Yeah, but the justification for this piece of legislation, there's three of them. If you would allow me, I would really like to answer those. So the first issue is district attorneys have faced scrutiny and accusations of not prosecuting crimes, including election crimes, and quite frankly, this legislative body debated that extensively last session.
Sure.
There was also, if you look at the stats of the Attorney General in the election cases that they've been prosecuting, that number dropped drastically when the power to prosecute election crimes was taken away. And then I think the item you're talking about is a August 2024 article that stated, actually the number is 6,500 non-citizens were found to have illegally registered in the state of Texas.
Yes.
Now, on top of those 6,500, there was another 6,000 felons that were found to not be permitted to vote.
Okay, so you referenced the 6,500.
Yeah.
I have here in my possession, which we've had many times in Elections Committee just this session, the actual stats from the Secretary of State. And I've seen the articles that reference that 6,500. That the governor's office put that out. I don't know if they did it to just intentionally mislead or if they couldn't read the Secretary of State's documents themselves. But the number is not 6,500. It's 687. The 6,500 comes from people that clearly just did not respond. And I know you and I have seen these in committee.
Yeah.
These are Secretary of State documents that I have copies of right here. These aren't news articles that have the actual numbers. And so I just think it's important, if we're going to have a conversation, that we don't use what has been proven to be a misleading number
I
by
don't
the
think it's,
governor.
I don't think the attorney. I don't think the governor did mislead
Well, he
people.
may have
I
been
don't agree with that. And let me just tell you this: just yesterday, a half.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Speaker,
Used for what purpose?
request to extend the time.
Members, you heard the motion. Is there objection? Chair is none, so ordered.
Just yesterday, half a dozen people were indicted on election fraud. One of them was a county judge. Two of them were city councilmen. And I'm just telling you, there's an issue with voter fraud, and there's a concern across the state of Texas and the nation.
Mr. Chairman,
Just yesterday, this happened.
Mr. Chairman, my point isn't that nothing ever bad happens. It's that I want us to have an honest conversation back and forth
I
about the
think
numbers.
the governor is
and we-
honest and did not mislead, and I believe his number of 6,500.
Well, but the Secretary of State's office right here has the number at 687
Yeah, but
in that same
those
time.
numbers could be based on different things. This was 6,500 non-citizens that were found to be
No, it
illegal
was 60
registered. Or
With-
6,500.
With
yeah.
all due respect, it was 6,500 people that were sent a letter, and the vast majority just didn't respond, which is common. We all get mail all the time. We've talked about this all the time in committee. In fact,
Well,
we've
that
had
doesn't mean
bills
they're-
to try to modernize things, even from the right, because people don't check their mail. So that number, as we
So
know
you're
and have
saying
discussed,
all 6,500 were legally registered to vote because they
six-
didn't respond to their
no,
mail?
they just didn't respond. It was never proven. In fact, when we went in and dug in the numbers, when reporters dug in the numbers, they started going and checking these, and almost all of it was wrong.
But if they're calling
600
out
I
a-
would give you 687 as Secretary of State has, but
But
not
if you,
6,500.
but if you call out 6,500 non-citizens, right, they went through a process to try to confirm that they were citizens, and they were unable to. And then to your point, all 6,500 received a notification that there was some kind of issue with their registration. And I think what I hear you're saying is because they didn't respond to that notification, they're legal. And I respectfully disagree with that.
What
And I
I'm
also
saying is because
disagree
they didn't
with
respond, we
and
don't
I-
have all the facts to make a statement like we do. Let me
and,
ask you one more question, and,
yeah.
and I know your bill is dealing with changing the jurisdiction about how these cases work.
Yeah.
How many cases in the last 20 years, while in that same time frame, we have cast 150 million votes in Texas, how many cases have been found for a non-citizen casting a vote?
Well, we have
we
district-
talked about it in committee.
Well, we have district attorneys that apparently are refusing to prosecute, and you took the power away from the attorney general, or the criminal court of appeals took the power away.
Yeah.
So I would imagine the number is
I would've voted
artificially
against
low.
it too, but the number is 4, Mr. Chairman, 4 times, and the system worked, and it caught them, and it punished them 4 times out of 150 million votes cast. I understand we have a disagreement on how this should work, but I guess my frustration is I just want to make sure the whole body understands that we are talking about a problem that statistically does not exist in this state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for answering my
Yeah,
question.
you bet.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Romero, for what purpose?
does the gentleman yield for questions?
The gentleman yield for questions.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Members, please take your conversations outside the rail. The gentleman yields. Members, please take your conversations outside the rails.
I yielded if you
Mr.
want.
Romero, the gentleman yields.
Chairman, do you find it interesting that you're talking about voter fraud, you're talking about election integrity, and the members of this body aren't even paying attention to your discussion?
Well, a lot of them are. A lot of them are seated and paying attention.
Do you think that this is clearly an important issue, that maybe more of the members should be paying attention to the discussion that was being had by 2 members of the Elections Committee on something as important as election integrity?
Again, I see a significant number of our members that are seated at their desk and they're paying attention to this riveting conversation.
Now, you bring up the 6,000 persons, undocumented people, and
You're illegally
illegals,
registered.
you call them. Illegally registered.
Illegally registered to vote, yes,
How do
sir.
you define illegally registered?
So what happens is the Department of Public Safety does a comparison of the voter files with different databases and try to make a determination. They're pretty accurate as far as determining whether that individual is a citizen or not. And then what happens is if they can't confirm that the individual is a citizen, then that individual is sent a notification. The county is actually the entity that sends the notification.
Would that
and
be
it gives
because-
that person, I'm sorry, what?
Would that be because they had a mistake in their voter registration form?
Well, the process of voter registration now, the number of errors are significantly lower than they have been in the past. There's a confirmation process that occurs when those individuals are entered into the database. But I mean, some errors do happen.
I'm trying to understand
But
how-
again, I mean, just put this in context then, but they're taking the data in the voter file and they're comparing it to other databases.
I'm sorry,
that
I can't hear you, Chairman.
Members, please take your conversations outside the rail.
So Department of Public Safety has a process where they take the data that are in the voter files and they compare them to different databases that they subscribe to. And obviously a large number of those are confirmed as eligible voters.
Okay.
But the individuals that they're not able to confirm, they receive from their county elections department a notification that there's some type of issue with their voter registration, and can they provide information via mail or come into the
Chairman,
so that's how that number comes from.
respectfully, I think that when you started your layout, you said that 6,000 illegals registered to vote.
No, I said, specifically what I said is 6,500 non-citizens were found to have illegally registered to vote.
Okay, so because they couldn't prove that they were non-citizens, does that mean that they were non-citizens?
They went through a process and found...
that's not my question.
Well, if I can
I'm-
answer your...
no, I know, but I was asking- it was
You
a
asked
little-
me a question and I'm attempting to answer it and you're interrupting me. So
Okay,
what do you want to do?
Just simply yes or no.
No,
by
you don't
the,
get...
by the method.
Let me be
of
really
which-
clear.
Members, please do not talk over each
Let
other.
me be really clear. You get to ask me the questions. You do not get to tell me how to answer.
Oh, yeah?
That's up to me.
Okay, I'll rephrase my question.
Okay.
You said that there was 6,000 illegals. Let me finish my question. And my question is, because of whatever method you described, and you can say it 5 times over and over again, but it's not necessary.
Okay.
Because they couldn't prove, does it mean that they were illegal, or does it simply mean they couldn't prove?
So your statement's inaccurate. So let me read to you again what I said. I did not say...
Okay,
I
do
did,
it for the 6th time.
Can I answer the question?
You're not answering the question.
I am. You just don't like the answer, but I am answering your question. I did not say 6,500 illegals. I said 6,500 non-citizens were found to have illegally registered to vote in Texas. And I've explained to you how that number came up, and you don't like my explanation.
Okay,
so
I'll ask you one more
can
time.
continue to ask me if you want, but I'm not going to change my answer.
You said 6,500 non-citizens. Based upon the questions that was the back and forth between you and Representative Busey,
Right.
you understood and he understands, I imagine because you're the chairman of elections, that there could be some other disqualifying factor, whether it was the wrong address and they couldn't reach them, whether they put in the wrong driver's license number, the last 4 numbers of whatever reason. Specifically, if the address was wrong, they reached back out to them, they didn't have communication back in return. That doesn't mean that person was a non-citizen. That just means that that person, could it be that simply by not returning the request for information from whether it be the Secretary of State or the DPS, that they simply just didn't reach them? So your statement is saying that there was 6,500 persons that were non-citizens is in fact not proof.
The reason why I keep explaining to you the process is any reasonable person would have to conclude, if you go through that process, even part of your process is giving that individual the opportunity to make any type of correction. Any reasonable person would conclude that they're non-citizens and they should not be registered to vote.
Okay,
And I
so
think
then-
we have
so-
a disagreement there.
So then what you're stating is that there was communication back and forth between the department and that person that
So
filled that.
again, you're saying something that I did
No, I'm
not
asking you
say.
a
So what
question. I'm asking you a question.
Specifically, what I said was they receive a notification from the county elections department that there's some type of issue with the registration, and they are given the opportunity to rectify that, and they chose not to.
Gentleman's time has
Mr.
expired.
Speaker, could you extend? I'd like to have
Members,
my
you've
question
heard the
answered.
motion. Is there objection? Chair is none. Says that it.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to get you to tell me. Let's just start with the number 6,500. And you're telling me that there's a process by which they can confirm 100% unequivocally whether that's you're telling me that if somebody doesn't respond, that means they're a non-citizen? And because, I mean, you understand, Chairman, you and I are smart people. If somebody doesn't respond, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're non-citizens. But I'll move on. How many cases does the Attorney General prosecuted or indicted in the last, let's say, since he's been in office? Are you aware? Or if you'd like, since you and I came in the same class, in 2015.
So in 2020, there are 314 open cases for election fraud. When the Stevens case.
What year was that?
2020.
And in 2020, how many of those cases were brought to a conviction?
I don't have that data. I'm just telling you what
Okay.
the open cases were.
Okay, so
that
in-
number dropped over 250 when the Stevens case came out.
Okay, so in 2020, there were 314 cases, prosecutions, indictments,
Open cases.
open cases. Can you tell me, since 2020, how many convictions has the Attorney General's office?
Well, the power to prosecute election crimes was taken away from the Attorney General, so the number dropped significantly.
Okay, so how many cases in total are you aware of that the Attorney General has taken and had a final conviction?
I'm not advised. I'm not aware of that number. I just
So
have the number
you're not
of cases.
aware as chairman of the Elections Committee?
Nope, the chairman of elections does not know how many successful cases the Attorney General has prosecuted in the last 10 years.
So what is the public, what are the people of Texas that are watching now and listening to you state that there's been 300 in that particular year and you're not aware of any conviction? Is it possible that there has not been a single conviction of all those 300 cases?
The only thing I know is, again, late last year, it was found to have 6,500 non-citizens on our voter rolls. And again, yesterday, there were indictments handed down to a county judge, 2 city council members, a former county elections
Are you making a
administrator
statement or are you
on
answering a
voter
question?
harvest. No, I'm answering your question.
I didn't talk about 6,500 again. I was asking you specifically about
I
indictments.
think the problem is I keep answering your question and you
No,
don't
I
like
didn't
my
ask you,
answers,
I didn't
guess.
ask you anything about 6,500 anything. I asked you
okay.
about cases. Can you answer?
And I've told you 3 times I don't have that information.
So in 2020, were there any convictions? In 2021, were there any convictions?
You can continue to ask me the
I
same
will.
question, but
In
I'm going to
20
give you the same response.
In 2022,
The same
are you aware-
response.
In 2022,
Same response.
sir, I haven't finished answering my question.
Okay.
In 2022, Chairman Shaheen, elections chairman, were you aware of any convictions that came to or any prosecutions that finished in a conviction?
Same response.
In 2023, are you aware of any prosecutions by the Attorney General that came to a final?
Same response.
In 2024,
Same response. And if
So
you want to
s-
ask me about 25, 26,
I don't think that it's funny when you
I
start
actually,
talking about.
I actually do think it's funny.
So when someone is indicted, a citizen of Texas is indicted, their life is changed, and the Attorney General or no one ever takes the case to final to get a conviction, is that something that you promote in the state of Texas? that there would be someone that's indicted
Yeah.
for voter fraud, prosecuted, but never convicted.
These were cases that I was giving you.
Understood. But
Okay.
if it were you, Chairman, and someone accused you of voter fraud, changed your life by it, without a single intent of ever taking it to final conviction, would you be okay with
How
that?
do you know what the intent of the Attorney General was?
I'm sorry, sir. Are you asking me questions from the front?
Yeah, and I'm allowed to ask you questions, actually.
you're not.
Nowhere in the rules does it say I can't ask you a question.
I'm asking you again, if you're a citizen of Texas here, you are okay with anybody, a DA or the Attorney General, beginning a prosecution on a U.S. citizen, a Texan, without ever having the intent of taking it to a final conviction?
How do you know what their intent is?
Are you
So are you telling me there's district attorneys all over the state of Texas that are prosecuting people with no intent?
I'm telling you that
carry out the case?
if you informed
Like,
yourself,
what point are you trying to make?
if you informed yourself, it's kind of hard to ask you a question about convictions if you don't know if any attorney general's cases they've ever gone to conviction, Chairman. So I'm asking you, since you don't know what's happened, I'm asking you, how do you feel about Texans being prosecuted?
I'm not aware of district attorneys that are going out and randomly prosecuting
say
people
district
without the
attorneys.
intent.
Are you
You said
okay?
district attorneys and the Attorney General.
The Attorney General in the state of Texas.
Okay, I'm not aware of the Attorney General going around and prosecuting people without the intent of carrying out the case.
You're not aware because you couldn't answer the question as to a single case by which the Attorney General has ever taken any of these accusations of voter fraud to a criminal conviction.
Do you want me to Google it for you? I mean,
No,
there's
you
AI,
should-
there's
you're-
ChatGPT. If you ask it, it'll give you the answer.
Members, please make sure you're not talking over each other so all the members can hear your debate.
Chairman Shaheen, do you, I would speak really slow. The Attorney General of Texas
Yeah.
has filed cases against U.S. citizens and has had them for years and not ever taken them to a final conviction.
Then go to the House.
Are you okay with Are you okay with U.S. citizens' lives being held in limbo by false or weak claims of voter fraud and never being taken to court? That's a question. Yes or no?
Again, you're a member of the House of Representatives.
yes or
You
no,
it's
Chairman.
not a yes or no.
Are you
You're
okay
a member.
with that
Excuse me.
situation?
I'm trying to answer your question. You're a member of the House of Representatives. Perhaps you can go to the committee that has jurisdiction over the AG and take up this issue if you're concerned with it.
I'll ask you again. Are you okay
Don't make me laugh.
with citizens of this country having an accusation of voter fraud in the court system for multiple years, and that case never coming to court?
Why didn't it come to court?
Are you going to answer the question? Why are you asking?
I don't even understand your
Speaker.
question or the context of your question.
Mr.
Why
Speaker.
did it?
Mr. Romero, for what purpose?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it correct for the speaker or the author of the bill at the front mic to continue to ask questions from the front mic rather than not answer the question that
I am
I've asked?
answering your questions.
Mr. Romero, that is not a proper parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it the norm of the House of Representatives that when a speaker from the back mic asks questions of someone from the front mic, that the person at the front mic should answer the questions?
Mr. Romero, is not a proper parliamentary inquiry at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And I am answering your questions.
I'll ask it again then.
I'll answer it again. It's only 11:30.
I've got all the time in the world.
So do I.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Motion to extend. Just teasing.
Mr. Mayor, for what purpose?
Do we have more time?
Mr. Romero, this would be the fourth extension of time. It requires unanimous consent. I do hear objection to it. Let's clear the well so we can continue the debate. Please take your seats, members. Members, please take your seats.